Welcome to the online lecture notes for Connorland WHAP and HoWo, dealing with the age of exploration. As always, these notes are entitled "The Age of Exploration in Less Time Than It Takes Me to Get to Work," because I want to do the best to highlight the major events and the major players of this in less than 10 minutes. So, as always, a major launching point for study, but not everything you need to know. So, just kind of use this as your starting point. Alright, so first thing we always do, what are we talking about here? And what we're talking about when I refer to the Age of Exploration is a time period when Europe begins to expand outside of their borders. Up to this point, they had been, I guess in the span of what we talk about today, they had been relatively isolated. Now, there had been contact with other areas of the world through things like the Crusades or the trips of Marco Polo or just missionaries and things like that. But for the most part, I mean, Europe was isolated from the rest of the world. And when I say the rest of the world at this point, I'm mainly talking about Asia, and that's kind of what they're trying to do with this. They're trying to get to Asia for the reasons we'll talk about in a second. So the next thing to figure out is why would they want to do this? What's the whole point of all this exploration we're going to talk about? And really, at the end of the day, what it busts down to are these things called the three G's, which is God, glory, and gold. Just a brief explanation on each. Obviously, with God, you're talking about the spread of Christianity. It's an effort of the monarchs that we're going to talk about in class, going out and along with these other factors, trying to spread the word of God or bring it to people who have not been introduced to Christianity. Next on the list is glory, both for the explorer and the monarch. And when I say monarch, once again, I'm talking about the king and the queen. This was a huge deal at this time. I mean, these conquistadors that we'll talk about in the next chapter, and the explorers want to be famous. They want to have glory. And along with that, so do the other monarchs, the kings and queens, because it's a prestige thing. It's a pride thing between these monarchs in Europe. And last but not least, and probably what it all comes down to, when it's all said and done, is gold. All right, is wealth, is money, and that goes both for the explorers and the monarchs as well. From the point of view of the explorers, they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're not going out and discovering these new lands because they want to simply just to do it. They want to make money off of it. They want to become rich. And from the standpoint of the monarch, any wealth for them benefits their realm, benefits their kingdom. All right, so they want to do that for these reasons as well. So what were they trying to do when they set out to accomplish this? The main thing is they're trying to get to Asia, and they're trying to get to Asia to get spices, to get luxury goods. And they've been trying to do this for years, but they were kind of roadblocked by the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, which is a Muslim empire we'll talk about later on. But when they have to go through these guys to get these products back to Europe, they end up having to pay astronomical costs because of the concept of the middleman. All right, if somebody's going to transfer it for you or transport it for you, they're going to jack the price up every time. So it kind of comes down to a lot of things that we talk about in this class. It's quicker, easier, and cheaper for them if they can find their own route and set up their own transportation points to get these spices from the east to the west. Next, we move on to who kind of kicks this off. Who's the inspiration for it? And the guy who kind of gets this rolling in Europe is Prince Henry the Navigator from Portugal. Now, Prince Henry wasn't an actual explorer himself, but he had the inspiration or the idea that exploration is a feasible thing or that it can be a feasible thing. And he also had the financial resources to make it happen. So what he does is he sets up a school of navigation in Portugal to kind of explore the opportunities or to explore whether it's a possible thing for them to do this. And as he does this, he kind of sets the precedent for the mode or for the means of exploration that we talk about going forward. The main two players in this era, in this designation, this time period of exploration that we're talking about, is Spain and Portugal, and they become the big dogs for one main reason, and it's simply because they're closer to the Atlantic Ocean than any other countries. If you think about where they're at on the map, they're at the westernmost point of Europe, so they're, I guess it's really weird to say closer, but they're closer to the New World. They're closer to the points they're going to explore than other countries, so it gives them kind of a jump start or a head start on exploration. So they get the thing rolling. To kind of gloss over a lot of the story for time purposes, they get going, they start exploring, and they form a huge rivalry, both over the ways that they get there and also what they do when they get to the New World. And when I say New World, to clear this up, I'm talking about North and South America. So there's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of rivalry going on, and it gets to the point where the Pope has to intervene and kind of settle this thing between them. And the way that he does it is by setting what's called a line of demarcation. And the line that he's talking about, it's an imaginary line that runs north to south that basically says, okay, Spain, you get this side of the line, Portugal, you get the other side. And this line that he comes up with is known or comes about through the Treaty of Tordesillas. And you can see from the map on the screen right here where the line is. And if you look at it, it looks like Spain has a huge advantage because there's all that land to the west that they're free to explore, and there's not a lot for Portugal to explore on it. And we're just talking about a little point of Brazil is really all they've got. But the key point comes in once Portugal works their way into India and into Asia, and they realize that, or they kind of start another argument with the fact that they say that India and Asia are on their side of the line. So it just ends up splitting them, splitting their areas of exploration, and they kind of go from there, and they kind of just start doing their own thing. So we move from the motives of it and how it got going to the major players, and you're going to see a lot more explorers in class. But you know, a couple of the big dogs just for to help you remember a little bit. First of all, is Columbus. I'm not going in depth into him because you've probably been beat over the head with him a lot in class up to this point, or in your other classes you've taken up to now. So Columbus, quote unquote, discoverer of the New World, mainly focusing with the Caribbean and all those things. And we'll talk about some of the things that happened with him and some of the results of it once we get back into class. Next is Vasco da Gama. Da Gama is a little bit different than Columbus because he wasn't an explorer of the New World. He went to already established places or places that already had trade routes, contacts, etc. He focused on India, and we'll talk about, like with Columbus, we'll talk about the reaction he got and some of the things that happened with him more in depthly in class. And last on our big three of exploration, or at least the beginnings of exploration, is Ferdinand Magellan. Now, Magellan is best known as the first person to circumnavigate the globe. In other words, he was the first person to make a trip all around the world. Now, the funny thing about it, and kind of the randomness of it, I guess you could say, not really random, but the ironic thing about it is that he did not actually make a trip around the world because he was killed in a clash in the Philippines before they even made it all the way around. So while his boats or his surviving boats and members of his crew actually made a circumnavigation of the globe, Magellan still gets credit for it because he was the head of the expedition and the name that was associated with it. So the main question with these explorers would be, how did they manage to be able to do this? What came about? What innovations? What inventions allowed Europeans to be able to go out and explore like they did at the time period that they wanted to? And it all comes down to technology, like a lot of things we talk about in this class. And the three main components that made this happen were the compass, the astrolabe, and better made ships, or shipbuilding technology. Just to kind of give you a brief overview of a compass, look, that helps you figure out what direction you're going. And it's very important when you start dealing with open air sailing or open sea sailing or going across the ocean. Now, this is a little bit different than they did things before because up to this point, if you were going to get on a boat and if you were going to sail somewhere, you normally stayed within sight of land. And that was for a couple of reasons. Number one is because you didn't have a compass, and if you got blown out to sea or if you stranded or straggled out to sea, there was a good chance you could get lost or your ship could be hurt by a storm or whatever it is. Also, you needed to stay close to sea or close to shore to get supplies to make sure if something did go wrong, you had access to a port to make sure that you didn't sink. But the compass allowed you to kind of go in a straight line out from land, all right, to get into open water where there's no land in sight. The astrolabe, next on the list, the astrolabe allowed you to determine what latitude you're on in relation to the globe, and that's pretty important as well because it helps you keep yourself on a route that's already been established, or B, plot a course of where you were going or where you were going to. And last but not least, you can't go across the ocean unless your ship can make it. And there were a couple of innovations in sail design and in hull design and in steering design that allowed them to be able to go over long distances over the open ocean for a long period of time and be able to keep the ships together and move a little bit more quickly and a little bit more efficiently than they did before. So at the end of the day, what does this all mean? What's the point of it? What are the results of it? And there's a couple of big ones that really influence the world that we live in today. The first one is that for the first time we have the entire world connected. Before this, there was regional trade, there was long distance trade, but it was between Europe and Asia. Okay, that's half the world when you look at it at the end of the day. For the first time, we open up the whole world to new products, new migrations of people, and just new things all around. Second of all, as a result of this, you get what's called the Columbian Exchange, which is the transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and people between the old and new world. Remember, once again, the old world is Europe, the new world is the Western Hemisphere, North and South America. And we'll talk in class pretty in-depthly about how this goes, but there's a lot of effects that come from that when you introduce things like new foods into diets, when you introduce new animals into the I don't know, the biospheres of new regions and the things that come about from us. Nonetheless, not to diminish its importance, but disease plays a pretty big role as well, especially when we talk about how these European powers began to colonize expand and colonize into these new areas, and how they more or less wiped out the populations with a small number of people just because they had smallpox along with guns and things like that. So that's a very basic overview of the Age of Exploration, or at least the beginnings of it. As always, I appreciate you watching. I appreciate your work and everything. If you're not a member of this class, you can get additional materials, be it documents or other lecture notes, at www.connorland.weebly.com, which is linked at the bottom of the page. Also, if you're not a part of this class, I would appreciate you subscribing. But that wraps up this very brief overview of the Age of Exploration. I appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.